Hey guys, today we have on return guest Justin Drake. Recently been working on a lot of the quantum stuff. And so I've now had on two guests with differing views on quantum. I shall now bring on a third. Justin's been pretty in the weeds. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Welcome, Justin. Thanks for coming on. Talk about a little bit the paper that you wrote recently alongside computer scientist at Google.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Guat. I guess one thing that I should disclaim is that I didn't do much of the writing. I maybe wrote a few percentage of it. I reviewed it. I made some corrections. I was mostly on the receiving end, trying to digest the paper and understand it. And I was also, trying to spread the word, I guess. In terms of what the paper contained was basically an algorithmic improvement to what's known as Shor's algorithm, which should be able to break ECDSA. And one of the interesting things of the paper is that they specialize to SecP256K1, which is the exact curve that Bitcoin and Ethereum use. And just to zoom out a little bit, they've kind of continued the tradition of finding orders of magnitude to squeeze. So if you go all the way back to 2004, the best known algorithm for Shor required 1 billion physical qubits. And now, what the paper showed is that you needed 500,000. Let's call it a million. So that's like three orders of magnitude. I guess one other interesting thing about the paper is that traditionally Shor was looked in the lens of both RSA and ECDSA. And one of the things that Craig Gidney learned, Craig Gidney is kind of the main guy who's kind of optimizing these circuits. He has a long tradition of pushing the frontier, is that there's actually more juice to squeeze with ECDSA than RSA. So traditionally, RSA was the poster child of all of these academic papers. And a lot of the breakthrough came from specializing to ECDSA specifically. And one of the aspects of ECDSA is that you only have 256 bits, as opposed to RSA, which is like a 2,000-bit kind of scheme. And this discrepancy in the numbers is where you get a lot of the efficiencies for ECDSA. So classically speaking, kind of both RSA and ECDSA are comparable, but in the quantum world, ECDSA happens to be much simpler. And another really interesting aspect of the paper is that the US government has entered the chat in a sense. And that has forced Google to act in certain ways, one of which is basically not disclosing the specifics of the algorithm that they're using. Instead, they have a zero knowledge proof of existence of this quantum optimization for ECDSA. And it's kind of pretty cool because it intersects with ZKVMs and SNOCs and crypto more generally.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. And then just for a little bit more before we dive further in, around the same time, there was an additional paper launched that showed the time to crack some of this cryptography, it could be shortened. And I suppose the reason that this was interesting was because I guess the theory is they're kind of a short range attack. Well, I don't think this is the same short range attack we're used to thinking of, but the idea of a short range attack whereby somebody could intercept basically a transaction in flight and be able to decrypt in the time that it takes, for example, for a Bitcoin block to be confirmed. So is that the essence of the other paper? I'm just giving a little bit of background here because I think that was the other thing that was released like sort of in concurrence with the paper that you took part in. Is that correct?
So actually the 9-minute number comes from the Google paper.
Okay, sorry. So what was the other paper?
Yeah, I mean, let me just go through this thing that I forgot to mention, which is a good point. So historically, Google has been focused on so-called superconducting qubits, which is a form of qubits which has a very fast clock cycle. Roughly speaking, you have a clock cycle every microsecond or every 10 microseconds. And it's one of the fastest form of quantum computers that we know of. And if you were to build, a quantum computer powerful enough, a so-called CROC or cryptographically relevant quantum computer, then it would take, a few minutes. Now, there's this other paper by a company called Oratomic. It's basically all stars within this company. I've been digging into it, and it's really impressive, the team that they have. And instead, what Oratomic is doing is looking at a completely different platform called neutral atoms. Now, this is not something that I knew about, and it's kind of the dark horse platform that in the last few years has really gained a lot of traction, and it's really fascinating what's going on there. But one of the superpowers of neutral atoms is that you can connect every qubit to every other qubit. So you have the so-called all-to-all connectivity, which is in some sense the polar opposite of what you get with superconducting qubits, where you only have nearest neighbor, kind of four nearest neighbor connectivity in the grid. And what that gives you is that the so-called error correction, which I'm happy to get into, is a couple of orders of magnitude more efficient. So instead of requiring roughly 1 million qubits in the superconducting qubit context, you only require 10,000 qubits, which is a much smaller number, and continues this again tradition of squeezing orders of magnitude out of Shor. And the scary thing is that we're not that far away, in my opinion, based on all of the research that I've been doing, from neutral atoms being able to run Shor. But there is a big caveat with neutral atoms, which is that they run extremely slowly. So the cycle time is on the order of milliseconds instead of microseconds. So it's roughly 1,000 times slower than superconducting qubits. And so what takes a few minutes in the Google superconducting context will take several days in the Oratomic neutral atom context. And the specific number that they quoted was 10 days if you had 26,000 qubits.
Got it. Okay, so that was like a little bit of context, and I may have done that in a bizarre order, which is not unusual for me. So let's zoom a little bit out now. You helped in some capacity. You said that you were mainly just peer reviewing and then maybe adding a few corrections to this Google paper. Regardless, your name's on it or attached to it in some capacity. What was sort of the takeaway, I guess, and why did this create a tremendous amount of hype and, perhaps fear and then, discussion? What were the big takeaways from this? I mean, obviously the logical takeaway, right, or one of the logical takeaways, I suppose, is that we are nearing cryptographically relevant quantum computers, and that we should be doing things right to, rectify the systems we have now that are vulnerable. But in terms of specifics, I obviously listened to this podcast you did with Bankless, which I think people should go listen to, because hopefully I'll ask slightly different questions or come at it from a different angle. But give me the broad takeaways, and then sort of maybe in your perspective where we're at right now in the trajectory for quantum computers, and then just blockchains as a whole.
Yeah, so for me, these two papers made quantum very real. On the one hand, there's the specialization for Bitcoin and Ethereum and the SecP256K1 curve. This is an exercise that no one had done. And so there was, I guess, a little bit of fog of war, which has now disappeared. We have much better understanding of the resources required to break these things. Another aspect of fog of war, which has been clarified for me, is what is the most likely quantum computing platform that will break Q-Day. So basically, which one is going to be the first to crack a key? And based on my understanding right now, the horse that's leading the race is the neutral atoms, and they're not leading it by a little bit. They seem to be leading it by a massive margin. And one thing which is a little scary is the rate of progress. So I believe that the very first time that there was even like the most basic quantum circuit in the context of neutral atoms was 2022. And so this is a very late arrival for this technology reaching this specific milestone. And actually, in some sense, it's the latest of all the platforms. Historically, we've had things like ions, we've had photons, we've had superconducting qubits, quantum dots, and then now at the very end we have these neutral atoms. And over the last 4 years, it's gone from controlling basically like 1 or 2 or 3 qubits to thousands of qubits and atoms. And the technology is extremely scalable. So there's no need for these crazy cryogenic fridges. So if I ask you to imagine a quantum computer in your mind, you might think of this chandelier from Google. This is all of the cooling and the fridges. There's none of that. So that already is a massive simplification. Another interesting aspect is that there's no wires. So the way that you control these qubits is using lasers. And the fact that there's no wires means that it's so much simpler to build. One data point that I learned about recently is that today Google will pay on the order of $1,000 per wire. And so if you have 1 million qubit, that's just $1 billion of wires. So not only is it extremely difficult to engineer, it's also extremely expensive. And then another really cool thing is that it looks like neutral atoms can easily fit all of the qubits that you want in a single so-called vacuum cell, which is like this chamber that has all of the qubits, and the chamber is tiny. It's like 1 square millimeter, and there's no need for so-called quantum networking. So if you look at superconducting qubits, you can only put so many qubits in one machine, if you will, and then you have multiple QPUs, so quantum processing units that you're networking together. With neutral atoms, you have more of a monolithic architecture where everything happens in a single machine, and so there's just one less engineering breakthrough that needs to happen because there's no need for quantum networking.
Okay, so is Google pivoting to this? I call them lasers because that's what one of my friends who's more knowledgeable than this, I am thinking these are like space lasers. So that's what I've been calling them. Has Google pivoted to this methodology, or are they still building their massive chandelier?
Yes, so they have pivoted, or at least they've like semi-pivoted. So now, no pun intended, they're in this quantum superposition of both superconducting qubits and neutral atoms. So Google historically has been kind of open-minded in terms of the platform that they go with, and as I understand, they've been like some mini pivots in the past, and now they have a dedicated neutral atoms team. And the interesting thing from a timing perspective is that they announced this neutral atoms initiative just a few weeks before the paper came out. And yeah, my sense is that, from a pragmatic standpoint, the short-term winner will likely be neutral atoms. But in the long term, in the end game, if you will, the superconducting qubits are very, very relevant because you can do computation 1,000 times faster. And so from a real business standpoint, if you're developing new molecules or materials, or you're doing these financial simulations or whatever you're doing, having the results 1,000 times faster is very valuable.
Okay, but what does winner mean in this context? Like winner insofar as that's where all the mind share is, or winner in terms of building a practically, cryptographically relevant quantum computer?
So winner, I mean specifically the latter. So which one will mark Q day, meaning which one will be able to break a key first.
Okay, and you've said that you think Q day, for at least most recently I heard you say you think Q day would be roughly around 2032. So is that still kind of your timeline?
Yeah, so this is what I call my working Q day, in the sense that I think there's a large enough probability that it happens by 2032 that we need to act. And the specific number that I put forward publicly is that there's at least a 10% chance that we'll have one of these CROCs by 2032. And 10% chance, for Ethereum is enormous, right? We can't take this chance. So we need to be ready well before 2032. Now, over the last 3 weeks, basically, I've been obsessed with these neutral atoms, and I've binge watched, over 100 hours of material, trying to learn as much as I can. And I'm not ready to make a final prognostication, but my Q day is going to come forward. So it's likely not going to be 2032 anymore. It's going to be a smaller number.
Yeah, well, one of the most talked about points as of late has been this notion that there will be, in the context of AI, right, we call it like a very fast takeoff. And in fact, the argument as of late that I've seen from some people is that there will be virtually no indication of progress before progress has basically hit exponential returns. Because I don't consider myself an expert, obviously, I don't understand why this would be the case. Now, I'm not saying it's not the case, but I am about as neutral as they come here, in my mind at least, right? In terms of whether or not that makes any sense. And I'm just interested to hear why. I don't know what side of that you're on, but maybe give a little bit of background, like articulate better than I can. The idea is that, we could go from 0 to 1 in, a matter of weeks, and that Q day won't have some lead up. And so the lead up is effectively now. Am I getting this correct?
Yeah. So I have a few thoughts here. The first one is that we've been in a phase of fast takeoff, if you will, for several years now. And quantum has been progressing exponentially by many metrics. And what I expect will happen is that this exponential rate will keep on progressing, and at roughly the same pace that it's been in the past few years. Now, you're right that from a UX standpoint, AI being 10% as smart as a human, or being roughly as smart as a human, that's only one order of magnitude away, only 1/10x. But it's the difference between AI being a toy and being one of the most powerful tools that humanity has ever created. And I think it will be a similar story for quantum. So we're, quote, only 10x away, one order of magnitude. And right now you can have like these toy circuits where we can do basic error correction and very small circuits on logical qubits. But we're not that far away, at least for the neutral atoms, from it being an extremely powerful tool. Now, to your point around whether or not the progress will happen publicly in a transparent way, one of the things that I discovered just randomly by watching one of these 100 videos that I watched, is that Craig Gidney, about 6 months ago, gave this talk at the Quantum Industry Day. And at the very, very end of his talk, he has a slide where he talks about an optimization that he found. And the slide says something along the lines, I can't tell you what this optimization is. I was told it was probably best idea to not disclose it. And
wait, sorry. Where does this guy work? He works at Google?
He works at Google, yes.
Okay.
Craig Gidney. He's a very important guy in the whole story. Based on everything that I know, I don't know for sure, but I'd give it, a 95% chance that this optimization that he had found 6 months ago is basically the one that underpins the paper that was published just a few weeks ago. And so the censorship from the US government maybe is not just around what gets disclosed, but it also on timelines, right? There's a possibility that the US government basically slowed down the whole thing by 6 months. And so I think even though what is coming out looks like bleeding edge research, we need to be careful to understand that maybe it's stale the moment it gets published.
Wait, okay. So I want to ask one point about that. When you say the U.S. government, where does that come from?
So Google basically disclosed in their blog post that was accompanying the paper that they were working with the US government, and that was one of the reasons why they had a zero knowledge proof, not disclosing the actual optimization. So there's like this secret optimization.
Yeah. All right, but like there's that like leaves a very vague surface area as to whether or not the U.S. government specifically asked them not to disclose it, or they happen to accompany them working on the paper, NIST, whatever, in some capacity, and then they decided not to disclose it because of other reasons, which they had stated, they'd rather this be, done through a ZK proof. I'm just, is that fair to say that we don't know for a fact that the U.S. government had any role in censoring perhaps the full disclosure? We just know that they worked in tandem in some form or another.
Technically, yes, but let me also answer it in another way, which is that I myself can't disclose everything.
Okay, I mean, okay. All right. Okay, go on. Sorry, what were you saying? Go on.
So yeah, another interesting aspect about this kind of fast takeoff idea is that over the last few months, we've had massive fundraisers for a lot of the leading neutral atom companies. So the quote unquote smart money is now investing many hundreds of millions into these companies, kind of out of nowhere. And this is in stark contrast to what happened previously. So this technology was just in the lab for 20 years. They got nowhere, and now they're getting hundreds of millions. And if you zoom out to the whole quantum industry, I believe last year we're talking on the order of $5 billion of investment, which is completely unprecedented. Before that, it was much smaller numbers per year of VC investment.
Let me take a moment to talk to you about Ellipsis Labs, a team I've known for a while. The Ellipsis team is one of the few that I can consistently point to and say, these guys really know what they're doing. Ellipsis Labs brought capital-efficient order books to Solana and started the Prop AMM revolution with SolFi. Altogether, they've saved retail traders tens of millions of dollars by reducing slippage on spot markets. They're bringing the same level of expertise to perpetuals with Phoenix, which is live today. Ellipsis Labs is backed by Paradigm, Electric Capital, and Han Ventures. I would consider them the foremost experts in crypto market microstructure. The best part is that Ellipsis Labs is hiring for New York-based engineers. Work with a small, focused team who are results-driven, collaborative, and use a modern stack. If you're an engineer looking to work with a DeFi team that's already proven itself in the market, go to ellipsislabs.com/careers.
It seems, and again, I'm looking at this from the outside, but it seems that the breakthroughs have come, and you can correct me if you disagree with this, but the breakthroughs have come in theory and not so much on the engineering side. Is that
I disagree with that. So there's basically breakthroughs everywhere.
But if you had to give a ratio in terms of the breakthroughs in terms of theory versus the practical engineering, is it not the theory that sort of greatly outweighs that right now?
I would argue no.
Okay.
So, like we've, for example, the Google paper, roughly speaking, is a 10x improvement. But, we've been getting 10x improvements per year on the neutral atoms, right? We went from basically 1 qubit to 1,000 qubits, between 2022 and now. And there are like a bunch of platforms out there that are very hard to scale. So I already mentioned the superconducting platform, where you have these crazy wires and you have the crazy cooling. If you take a platform like ions, ions are these charged particles, and so they repel each other, and so it's just very difficult to put many mutually repelling particles in the same box, and so you have to be extremely creative as to how you manipulate these things. The neutral atoms, as the name suggests, they're neutral, they're not charged, and so it's very easy to just put thousands of them in the same vacuum chamber and control them with these lasers, as you put it, and there's no fancy cooling. So these things run on kilowatts of power, as opposed to a fully fledged CROC on a superconducting platform would more likely than not consume megawatts. So it's a completely different type of scale. And these quantum computers, they're encased in these boxes, and like roughly speaking is a cubic meter. So it's just a box out there that you can put in a traditional data center. It consumes a few kilowatts, which is the equivalent of a few electric ovens. And right now they're running with hundreds or a small number of like close to 1,000 qubits, and soon enough they will be running with tens of thousands of qubits. And roughly speaking, what the Atomic paper showed is that ballpark figure, we need 10,000 atoms to run these things. And as you said, there's a lot of progress on the theory, and I do expect some amount of progress, even though like right now, when you talk to Craig Gidney, he'll tell you that he can't see where there's like further optimization. So maybe we're going to have diminishing returns on the software side of things. But yeah, I do expect that whenever a CROC comes out, it will only require about 10,000 qubits.
Okay, let me add, this is all good stuff. Let me zoom out now and provide what I think are some of the arguments or claims or just opinions in general. So my first question is, well, I'll give some context. You think Q-Day is in 2032, but you think that it could be moved up. And I'm not necessarily holding you to this. I'm just going off of what you've said, given your current, sort of digging into this stuff. So let's say within the next 5 to 7 years, there's a CROC, as you call it. I didn't know that we called it that, but I'll go along with it. It is easier than CRQC. So within 5 to 7 years, there's a CROC. Do timelines matter? And the reason I ask this is because a lot of what I see the pushback on, and I'm like, okay, well, that actually it seems like a fair counter argument, is that it does matter in terms of how we redesign. I mean, obviously, we're coming at this from the blockchains we love and use or whatever. It does seem that if something is 50 years away versus something that is 7 years away, the decisions and even the mind share around it could be vastly different. And I mean, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but in 50 years, we could all be on Mars. And so a lot of the claims I see with people who tend to be skeptical is like, look, this is so far away that there are many, maybe there's lower hanging fruit they want to focus on, or there are many things in the interim that could happen that just have a much more measurable and sort of impactful role on the trajectory of blockchains, I guess, specifically, right? So the reason that I think there is, just to finish up here, the reason I think there's pushback is because when there's sort of mania and hype and, potentially fear, and I'm not necessarily accusing you of this by any means, but when there is a lot of sensationalism around something, it does incentivize, maybe fast action when we really have no idea. So I'm curious, like sort of maybe just your broad response to that in terms of like, if it is 7 years away, I understand. If it is 50 years away, it could be a completely sort of different, I would say the problem set could be entirely different. And it also would change, in my mind, any types of improvements or immediate changes. So I don't know, like what are your just overarching thoughts on that? And also maybe one other thing, like what are your overarching thoughts on the skepticism that, okay, they're real, but they're 50 years away or 100 years away or whatever?
Yeah, good questions. I guess one side note is that I've never heard anyone say CROC. I guess it's maybe an invention, but I think it. Yes, but I'm hoping that the term will catch on.
I feel like you do this a lot.
So I guess a bunch of people have been saying that quantum computers are perpetually 15 years into the future or 10 years into the future. I've very rarely heard about 50 years or 100 years. And I think, it is a reasonable default position to say that, these things are perpetually at least a decade away. And when you look at Grover's algorithm, it's 30 years old. Sorry, not Grover, Shor's algorithm. It's 30 years old. And so, we've been waiting patiently for roughly 30 years old. There was a major breakthrough called quantum error correction, which came a couple years later. But still, we're talking decades. Now, to your question around do timelines matter, I think they very much do matter when we're significantly under a decade away. And I do strongly believe that we are significantly under a decade away. So the difference between 3-4 years and 6-7 years is enormous, especially in the blockchain context where things happen at a glacial pace, especially for Bitcoin. In the context of Ethereum, what we've set ourselves as a timeline is to try and upgrade all layers of Ethereum by 2029. So that means replacing the consensus layer that has BLS with something post-quantum, the data layer, which has KZG with something post-quantum, and the execution layer, which has ECDSA with something post-quantum. So we have, 3 major upgrades in some sense that we have to do, and we have to do it on a short timeline. Now, if you talk to some of the optimists, they tend to be those that are actively working on these quantum computers. They're the believers, they're the entrepreneurs. The most aggressive timelines that you'll see is actually 2029. You'll have some people claim that there's a very high chance that we'll have a CROC in 2029. And, this is something that I've been much more appreciative of in the last 3 weeks, where I've tried to learn as much as possible about quantum computers as opposed to post-quantum cryptography. And, I'm starting to believe, these crazy entrepreneurs more and more. And if indeed, we come to the conclusion that 2029 has a significant probability attached, then really we should be targeting 2028. And for us, the difference between targeting 2028 and 2029 is enormous, right? It's the difference between the pace that we're at right now, where we have, let's say, 5% of the protocol cluster within the Ethereum Foundation working on this, to maybe 20%, or in an extreme situation, we would potentially have to set up a mini Manhattan project and do this thing in an emergency where there's like half of the protocol cluster just all working on quantum. This is not something that I had previously considered, but now with my research is a possibility. But as you said, we need to be extremely careful with malinvestment and rushing. Rushing in particular and panicking is definitely not the way forward. This needs to be an extremely fact-based and rational conversation. And what I've been doing over the last few days is just emailing a bunch of academics and a bunch of entrepreneurs, asking them to answer my questions and to have calls with me. And I'm trying to have a broad overview and kind of survey all of the different takes. And once this research process is done, then I'll come forward with my conclusions. But it's clear to me now that timelines matter a lot because they're significantly lower than a decade, and these migrations take many years.
I definitely won't bet against mankind, and if there's a very challenging problem, I tend to think that humans can solve it. I think simultaneously, mostly what I've seen from, and maybe you can respond to this, mostly what I've seen from quantum for the past, well, obviously it's come to the forefront in the past 6 months, but I'd heard about quantum computers and stocks a long time ago. In fact, like Shkreli was on this, and this has been sort of a hype thing for 5 years or so. And it's one of these things where, because there is not a tremendous amount of current, profitable endeavors with quantum computers that it's always sort of what's coming in the future. And so unfortunately, maybe this is, I've kind of heard this, boy who cried wolf thing, where like when it actually does come around, people are unprepared because have some vision of quantum computing in their mind. But it's one of these things where it's almost critical for people within the quantum, both, private side, but then also researchers, to prop this up and get a lot of hype around it, because that's how you keep your job. And that's, I guess, like one thing I've had difficulty understanding is the degree to which we've crossed the chasm of, okay, well, like there's been didn't Vitalik try to like get involved in some like quantum computer thing back in 2013? There's been a lot of talks about this for quite some time. And I'm not even necessarily skeptical. Like, again, I don't have a strong view one way or another, but my only, way to frame it is like, I don't really know how to tell what's real. And I think it's very, very difficult for the average person to determine what's real. Would you like at least agree with that part? Like, basically nobody, even very intelligent people are infrequently subject matter experts on this niche and sort of, unique of a domain.
Yeah, I very much agree with a lot of what you said. I remember hearing about quantum computers when I was a teenager, maybe 15, 16 years old. I'm now 37. So, it's been over 20 years that these things have been talked about. And I remember being extremely excited when I was a teenager, and these things kind of never happened in my lifetime, at least not so far. In terms of the incentives and those who stand to profit and potential bias that comes with it, I think the best that you can do here is just have very clear metrics and very clear milestones. So there's been many very significant breakthroughs. So one of them is around quantum error correction. This is really the key challenge that needs to be solved. And in 2014, Google, interestingly, in a different paper, 2024, Google in a different paper showed that quantum error correction is real. It's not just a theoretical thing. So the way that this works is that you have a collection of physical qubits, and they, as a whole, they represent one logical qubit. And what they did basically is that they grew the error correction. So they started with a small error correction, and then a medium size, and then a larger one. And what they showed is that as the number of physical qubits grew, the fidelity, which is basically the quality of your final logical qubit, grew as well, exponentially. And so that's what you want in order to be able to crack Shor. Another thing that has been, improving radically is the fidelities of the physical qubits. So what is the quality of your basic transistors, if you will? And in order to do error correction, you need the fidelity to be on paper at least 99%, but in practice it's closer to 3.9, so 99.9%. And basically, all of the platforms somehow coincidentally are reaching this point where they're reaching 3 nines of fidelity. So that means that on all of the platforms, you can start building logical qubits and doing like true error correction. And then there's just been all sorts of breakthroughs in terms of the types of error coding. So traditionally, this code called the surface code or the toric code, which consumes many qubits, physical qubits for every logical qubit. Roughly the ratio was 1,000 to 1. Now we have codes where the ratio is 10 to 1, and that is in some sense a 100x improvement. But also just from an experimental standpoint, previously, it was just very difficult to control the qubits, for example, to perform so-called gates, quantum gates. And now we have these very easy ways of just taking the 2 qubits that we want to interact. We just put them one on top of the other. We shine a light, and then ta-da! That's your quantum gate, which is very a big breakthrough just from a complexity and engineering standpoint.
Yeah, I think that I guess the one thing I would say to all of that, and again, nobody should listen to me for what it's worth, but even the terminology milestones sits almost in opposition to this, more kind of recent narrative that there will be no milestones. They're so it's this kind of weird, confluence of we're currently observing the milestones, but you won't actually have any milestones. It will be a 0 to 1. And I think that's what makes it especially challenging for someone like myself who's trying to distill this into something, slightly comprehensible and then determine, okay, what do I think the probability of is something like this occurring? Not that it really matters. I don't have any influence in any of these systems. It's not so it's just for personal sake, but it's one of these things where it's we talk about, certain milestones and 10x improvements in scaling, 10x improvements in error correction and so on and so forth. And then it's but actually, it's going to be 0 to 1. That doesn't really make sense in my mind, but again, it's not to say that it can't be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your time frame, right? So we've been waiting 32 years since Shor's algorithm was invented, and in the grand scheme of things, it will all happen over 18 months, which is a blip. But you're right that if you zoom in, there are going to be all sorts of milestones.
Okay. All right. Let's now pivot to the blockchains. Well, you had a lot of thoughts, I think, in the discussion you had on Bankless about Bitcoin specifically. Just maybe you can run with that. Give me your overarching thoughts, and then I'll probe and push back when necessary.
Yeah, I'm happy to put my Bitcoin security hat on. And actually, on this note, my Twitter bio has been for a very long time Bitcoin security researcher. And the reason why I had that is because I was looking deeply into the security budget and tweeting about it. And people got really confused this time round. Some people actually believed that I was a Bitcoin security researcher, including many AIs. Elon Musk replied to my tweet asking, is this real? And Grok was like, oh yes, it's very real. Bitcoin security researcher Justin Drake, blah blah blah. But yeah, putting this aside, I feel like there's actually a lot of progress happening with Bitcoin. And I think to a large extent, the Google paper has been a bit of a wake-up call. Just a few days ago, we had BIP 361 that was finally published and had, an actual BIP number. We have Blockstream, who now has a team of 4 people, very qualified people looking into hash-based signatures. It's something that people accept as an important discussion topic. So Coinbase has this whole committee. They just published a report. There's prominent figures like Nick Carter, who has really shifted the overturn window and forced the discussion in a sense. There's dedicated companies like Project 11 that are doing a lot of good work. Just a few weeks ago, NIST had a whole blockchain and crypto event where we talked about post-quantum and things like that. And so I'm hopeful that the technology will not be the bottleneck. What I see as the bottleneck for Bitcoin is the social layer, both in terms of the latency to put in place these technical upgrades. Historically speaking, we're looking at roughly 5 years per fork, and it's possible we don't have 5 years. And I guess the other really interesting question is what to do with the old coins for which there's an exposed public key, for example, Satoshi's coins, and likely won't be moving unless a quantum computer comes forward. So do you burn those coins? Do you not burn them? This is part of the topic of BIP 361. And the responses are very divisive. There's a lot of purists who do not want to burn and who want to protect the property rights, and who maybe are claiming that if, let's say, 15% of the supply gets stolen, then no big deal. The price will go down temporarily, but ultimately it's for the long-term good of Bitcoin, and we shouldn't sacrifice our principles. I tend to lean in that camp, but then there's the other camp, the Michael Saylors and the institutions, where, for them it's kind of clear that we need to burn. And so what I'm expecting will happen is a little. Go ahead.
Wait, hang on. I don't know that. Okay, so I think Saylor actually basically deflected and obfuscated this question from what I've heard him say. And I just take a slightly different view than you on this. Well, actually, maybe a 180 degree different view on this. Like, I think that Saylor and BlackRock and the ETFs and large institutions, the argument as of late has been, well, it's not 2017 when the block size wars came around, and it's a totally different holder base now. And from my perspective, this just raises the stakes for them in terms of, if they pick the wrong fork, if they pick the wrong side to support, if they even are saying anything that indicates, what their beliefs may be now, this could be a massive liability for them. So this is an interesting case of, I know you have your biases and I have mine. So we'll go ahead and disclaim that, but we almost have the exact same, we're looking at the same thing. And I kind of come to, I don't know. I don't know that it's correct to say that Saylor and BlackRock are going to be keen to burn those coins, because it will make it ultrasound there for, however many blocks it takes to move on to a new network. I don't know that I agree with that necessarily.
Okay. That would be a great outcome where, the Bitcoin community converges pretty rapidly on not burning the coins. And then, may the chips land where they land, and maybe you have some sort of a bounty to develop these quantum computers, and that will pay for the billions of dollars of investment that have gone into them. I think that would be a very net positive for humanity.
You sound like a Bitcoiner now. Okay, I heard you mention that
I am a Bitcoiner.
Do you actually hold Bitcoin?
I do hold Bitcoin, yes.
Yeah, I think probably you hold it as an
NFT.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, but there are some ideas you mentioned. I heard this one thing about there's maybe a way with seed phrases. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So basically, a few years after the genesis of Bitcoin, there was this standard, one of the BIPs, I forget the exact number, whereby instead of having these raw private and public keys, you instead had something a little bit more sophisticated, which is this seed phrase, which might be 12 words or 24 words. And then from the seed phrase, you derive the private keys. And this standard kind of became extremely prevalent within Bitcoin. It's the one that all the hardware wallets use, and also the non-hardware wallets, the software wallets use. And so what you can do basically is have a proof of knowledge of the seed phrase as opposed to a proof of knowledge of the private key. And this proof of knowledge of the seed phrase is post-quantum secure. So even though the private key it can be derived from the public key, you can't derive the seed phrase from the private key. So what BIP 361 suggests is basically, why don't we just freeze the coins that are vulnerable, and then just allow people on a different schedule, possibly several years into the future, to revive those coins by providing a proof of seed. And this is a beautiful idea, and I think it does actually work technically. There is just one minor little detail, which is that a significant number of the coins, including Satoshi's 1 million coins, but also, another, call it 500,000 coins, for which the creation of the corresponding addresses happened before this seed phrase BIP was ever in place. So there's basically zero chance that Satoshi could provide such a proof of seed phrase because the technology didn't exist back then. And so even though you can resolve the question for most coins after this BIP, anything before that is still potentially contentious.
You're generally impressed with the progress now, maybe within the past couple of weeks of Bitcoin. Have any other thoughts there? I mean, it is kind of interesting to hear you say that you think the community will rally around burning or freezing. As of right now, I mean, personally, I suppose my opinion could change, but I do feel pretty strongly against that. But I mean, I've seen arguments on both sides. In fact, I thought it was interesting. Peter Wille was in favor of, freezing coins, forking them out, whatever it may be. So I think that's it is interesting that this is a topic that seems to kind of transcend what you would think are the normal party lines here. But yeah, I guess that with regards to Bitcoin, it seems like, okay, well, maybe some progress is being made there. And I also saw there's thing, I forget what it's called, but I think Rob and Linus released something that would allow for truly, quantum secure wallets. I don't know if you followed that at all in the past week or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm not claiming that there won't be a whole discussion. I was just saying it would be amazing if the Bitcoin community were to converge. And I do agree with you right now that we're in this quantum superposition, if you will, where a very large fraction of the community is on either side. In terms of what you just mentioned, I believe it's actually Starkware that came up with a bunch of tricks that were inspired by Robin, Linus, and basically make use of BitVM ideas. But practically speaking, it's not really pragmatic. So we're talking about hundreds of dollars potentially to make a single transfer, and the transaction sizes are potentially bigger, and I don't know all of the trade-offs, but it sounds not super practical. And I believe it's Avihu from Starkware who kind of himself is basically saying that this is not practical. This is not really a solution. It's more of a thing of academic interest, and potentially other people can improve it over time to make it practical. Yeah, in terms of thoughts related to Bitcoin, one of the things that I'm hoping will happen is that we will have an industry-wide de facto standard. So just like Satoshi kind of went ahead with SEC P256K1, we kind of all go ahead with the same standard. And if and when we have that, then it means there's just way more eyes on the one thing that gets picked. All of the tooling just works out of the box for all the chains. Right now, as it so happened, it's primarily the Ethereum Foundation that is putting a lot of work in this notion called signature aggregation. So just stepping back a little bit, with post-quantum signatures in general, we have what's called the size problem. So a post-quantum signature will be at least 10 times larger than a classical signature. ECDSA is 64 bytes. A post-quantum signature will be, the smallest one that has been standardized by NIST is called Falcon. If you take the lowest security level, which is level 1, you'll get to a signature size of 666 bytes, which is more than 10x. And so if you were to naively kind of replace ECDSA with a post-quantum scheme, your TPS, your throughput will will go down dramatically. So Bitcoin might go from 3 TPS to 0.5 or something, which in my opinion is a little bit of a non-starter. And so the thesis that we have within the Ethereum Foundation is that so-called signature aggregation, where you can take many signatures in a single block and squish them together in a single proof, is going to be required. And we've basically developed the technology. It's something called Lean VM, and we have Lean signatures, and we're closely working actually with various people to make this work for Bitcoin. So we had various discussions and calls with the Blockstream folks, and we now have a dedicated person called Owner, we gave him a grant, and he's working on nothing other than taking Lean VM and kind of making sure that it works really smoothly for Bitcoin. And the nice thing about Lean VM is that it was designed with a Bitcoiner mindset, like maximum security, no compromises. So everything is hash-based. There's no exotic lattice assumptions. It's using only SHA-256 and nothing else. So this is already a sunk cost from a security assumption for Bitcoin. It's like literally more secure, even in a classical sense, than ECDSA, because you don't have these elliptic curve considerations. And ironically, it's also a scalability increase. And the reason is that a typical Bitcoin block will have 10,000 signatures. So 10,000 times 64 bytes per signature, that's 640 kilobytes, roughly speaking, on average, of signature data per block. But these aggregate signatures, these short proofs, are only on the order of 100 kilobytes. So in some sense, you're unlocking half a megabyte of data, and this particular solution not only wouldn't require a block size increase, but it would also be a throughput increase. And so,
wait, have you heard of CISA, like cross input signature aggregation? Is this similar?
It's much more powerful than cross input signature aggregation. Basically, it's aggregation across all of the inputs of all of the transactions.
Instead of just select ones. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
You brought up NIST a number of times now. Do you have any concerns about working with somebody like NIST on this? Right? Like, I mean, part of being truly, call it nation state resistant with these systems is not relying on, various forms of cryptography that, well, okay, like maybe that's not the right way to say it, but, not being dependent on something that wasn't built from scratch, perhaps. Do any of these kind of ideas put forth by NIST, like, do you have any concerns about backdoors or, malicious intentions there? Maybe not across the board, but in some form or another?
No, it's zero concern. You're right that historically speaking, there have been shenanigans with NIST and various other government agencies. But for the hash-based stuff that we're looking at, basically zero concerns. And the reason is that your starting point is just a hash function like SHA-256. And then from that basic primitive, you build your signature scheme. And the amazing thing is that you can prove mathematically that your signature scheme has 128 bits of security, for example. So on the math side of things, you're fully covered. And then on the implementation side of things, there's something called formal verification. And now we have formally verified implementation of these hash-based schemes that complement the security proof. So in some sense, it's as good as you could hope for, and there's no room for error with NIST specifically. One of the things that I'm not super impressed with NIST, let's call it a possible opportunity for improvement, is the specific timelines that they put forward as recommendations, or actually in the context of the U.S. government itself as a directive. So they basically are telling the various branches of government to upgrade to post-quantum cryptography by 2035. And what has happened, in the minds of many people is that they anchor around this number 2035. And I think this is a very big mistake, because given what we know about quantum computers, it's, in my opinion, very likely, call it 80% chance, that we're going to have a CROC before 2035. So in some sense, this one recommendation that NIST has made might undo a lot of the good work that they've done in other places. And I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if they went ahead and changed the recommendation over the, call it the next 12 to 18 months.
You're even more scared than the people with the nuclear codes. That should resonate with people. Okay, this has been fun. Oh, I want to ask you one last thing. I heard you talking, of course, bringing back up the security budget stuff, but you seem to think that 2032 also was some, I don't know if it's 2032, but maybe early 2030s, was also some sort of notable year for Bitcoin. And obviously you've been beating this drum for quite some time. What were you saying there? I didn't fully understand it, but if you wanted to elaborate, I thought I should give you an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. 2032 is a halving year. You should know this off the top of your head. So, but
I didn't know if that was when you thought. I didn't know if that was when you thought that this was game over. So, anyways.
Yes. So now we're in 2026, and just a few days ago we celebrated the halving. So in 2 years' time, in 2028, we're going to have issuance. And then 4 years after that, in 2032, we're going to have again. So in 2032, we're going to be 4 times lower than where we are today. Now, unfortunately, the fee market has been absolutely abysmal in Bitcoin land. I encourage you to have a look at the data, but long story short,
I've seen it.
Yeah. So long story short, it's 0.6% of all of the miner income coming from transaction fees. The 99.4%, basically almost everything, comes from issuance. So when a halving happens, it's like a true hard halvening. The fees are not going to be there to save you in any meaningful way unless things change quite dramatically. And I've tried to argue that even today, Bitcoin is just extremely insecure, in the sense that if a motivated attacker that had a few $1 billion at the disposal and a bunch of skills around running data centers and things like that, then they could definitely pull it off. And the metric is called economic security, which is basically the amount that you need to invest in terms of hardware. That's both the physical mining rigs, but also the data centers that will host these rigs, both in terms of power supply with the transformers and whatnot, as well as the cooling. So the whole package, that's what's called economic security. And it's on the order of $10 billion for Bitcoin. And I'm happy to go through the math. I have it all off the top of my head, I guess. And, $10 billion is not that much for a network which is worth over $1 trillion. And so there's another metric that comes in, which is the so-called security ratio. What is that? It's basically the total value secured, which is all of the BTC, which is, let's call it $1 trillion, divided by the amount securing, which is the economic security, which is only $10 billion. So you have a security ratio of 100x. Now, there's multiple ways to make money from a 51% attack, but one of them is to short a Bitcoin, and so you need to ask yourself: is there more Bitcoin available to be shorted than the ratio of economic security to total value secured? So basically, another way to ask it is, can I short more than 1% of the supply? And the answer, even today, is yes. You can go on CME and you can short 1% of the supply. But the thing is that with every halving, the security ratio degrades. So what is today a 100 to 1 ratio will be a 400 to 1 ratio in 2032. And, at that point, it should kind of be, an absolute no-brainer that Bitcoin is insecure. And I expect, some sort of entrepreneurial individual who has, the ability to raise a few $1 billion, or who happens to have a few $1 billion, or maybe it's a government like China that goes ahead and does it, and potentially reaps the financial rewards. Now, one of the big counter arguments to this historically has been, isn't it extremely difficult to get access to power? Like, it's all well and good to place a big order for rigs, but you also want to set up, roughly speaking, 10 gigawatts of data center infrastructure. And one of the absolutely amazing statistic, which I learned about a few months ago, is that China, as a country, is deploying 1 gigawatt per day of power. So, they're building, to a very large extent, solar farms at the rate of 1 gigawatt per day. So, 10 days worth of growth in China is basically sufficient to 51% attack Bitcoin. And so, if at any point in time Bitcoin were to become in any way, systemically relevant, in global finance, to the extent that China has an incentive to shut it down, then China will shut it down, because it's just in some sense a very doable thing for them.
I feel like, Justin, to be honest, I could make a very similar projection with ETH. Okay, so like, hear out my analogy here. Okay, at the merge there was roughly 15 million ETH staked, and ETH was $4,500. Now there's 30 million ETH staked, and ETH is $2,500. 30 million, 60 million, 120. Okay, so in 8 years, there will be 120 million ETH staked, and ETH will be $625. This is a similar mental model in my mind, if we're projecting out, security budgets and stuff. And personally, I think both chains are going to be just fine. But I never really hear people push back on, I listen to what you say, and I also I'm the first to admit, like, I look at mempool.space. Like, I see that most transactions are clearing at, sub 1 sat per VByte. Like, nothing you say is, well, I don't necessarily agree with all of, like, the, mining and shorting and all that stuff. But in terms of what I can observe about what fees are being paid, I think you're spot on. I don't think anyone can really deny this, right? But it's interesting that I don't hear this in the context of Ethereum. Like, why is what I just said any different really than the projecting out Bitcoin mining in the same capacity?
No, you're absolutely right. It needs to be said for Ethereum, and it is being said. Like, maybe you're listening to different places, but it is being discussed. So there's the exact same notion called economic security for proof of stake systems. And as you alluded to, basically it's the total amount of ETH staked times the price of ETH. So, call it, very roughly speaking, $100 billion. Already right off the bat, Ethereum has, roughly speaking, 10 times the economic security of Bitcoin. But the story becomes even more compelling when you look at the security ratio. And the reason is that Ether, the asset, is securing quite a bit less value than Bitcoin. If you take all of the assets combined on Ethereum, you're talking about roughly $500 billion. Bitcoin is, call it, 1.5 trillion. So, the numerator here is that there's also a 3x difference. And so when you take the 3x times the 10x, you're looking at a security ratio which is off by a factor of 30. But even that is not really capturing the full story. And the reason is that with proof of stake, you have a way to recover gracefully from 51% attacks that you don't have with proof of work. So if someone, like China, were to invest in in the data centers and the rigs to perform a 51% attack, they can essentially perpetually, or at least on an undefined basis, just keep on attacking the thing over and over again, every single hour of the day, every day of the week, for as long as they want, and really create a huge amount of chaos. In the context of proof of stake, if there is a 51% attack, you can identify who is doing the attack. So you can identify the precise validators and the precise collateral that they have, the stake, and you can slash the attacker. So there would be short-term chaos. So, for example, over a period of a whole week, there would be like these weird rollbacks, and people will be confused as to what is the source of truth. But the community can come together, identify the attacker, and remove it, which is not something that's possible with proof of work.
Okay, I think like the threat, I think the threat of having your coin slashed is real, and it disincentivizes people. And I think similarly in Bitcoin, the threat of bricking the entire thing, like a lot of times with these systems, the game theory is really preventative, right? And it's like similar with, I think a good analogy is like L2s with true escape hatches, right? It's like in reality, you can end up where there's zero gain for both sides, but the threat of being able to publish a fraud proof and exit the system is oftentimes enough to disincentivize malicious behavior. And so I just kind of extend this to a lot of how these systems are designed. And I mean, I don't think Ethereum is going to be 51% attacked, because I think people know, I say people, like any large actor knows that is like likely a very, very bad idea insofar as they're just going to be reorged or forked out of the network in some capacity. I don't think it's that different a proof of work. Now, what my point though with my initial thing was, you really got people talking. I mean, credit, like you're very, keen on creating memes. I think you have always seen the value in trying to create a memeified version of a narrative. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But regardless, I think you keyed into that. And this security budget thing is you get people responding near constantly. Like you have a whole little army of drones there, but I just never hear it described with regards to Ethereum. And I'm like, look, I think both networks are fine, but it's not like Ethereum completely reinvented the wheel here. You guys also have this. And if I wanted to project out, I can, take similar amounts of stake and take the price of ETH and do a very similar model. So I just wanted to make the slight point that you've done a good job in the Bitcoin security budget being an extreme problem, and then not much discussion around the Ethereum security budget. I don't think either of them are huge deals, but I know you do. So credit where credit's due insofar as driving that one home.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you that it's not a big deal for something like an L2 that has an optimistic game where you just need one person out of n in order to present the fraud proofs. You just need to look at the fundamentals of the game theory. So in that context, it's kind of very clear that it's not a problem. In the context of Ethereum, yes, there is an option to do a short-term 51% attack, but the critical feature is that you can identify the attacker and slash them. So here you don't have one of n, it's a n over 2 out of n. So basically it's a 51% attack. And these things are much easier to perform than basically n out of n, where you have to corrupt everyone in the system, and prevent them from submitting these fraud proofs. So yes, it is a much weaker barrier to entry to performing these attacks. And now you need to look at two things. One is, how high is this barrier to entry? What do you gain from making an attack? And look, the rough rule of thumb is that you can make about 1% of the total value secured. So again, Ethereum has about $500 billion, 500 billion of total value secured. If someone were to perform an attack on Ethereum today, it could rug a few exchanges. It could like cause, liquidations, and you could manipulate order books, or you could do all sorts of nasty things. But roughly speaking, if you're very clever, you can end up with $5 billion. So that's what you stand to gain. What you stand to lose is the security, the economic security, which is on the order of $100 billion. Actually, it's like 1/3 of that, because it depends on the details, but it's like 1/3 or 1/2. But call it, tens of billions of dollars. And so the tens of billions of dollars is like clearly much larger than the $5 billion that you stand to make. So this is why it's important for the security ratio to not be completely out of whack. And I think in the context of Bitcoin, 400 to 1 will be out of whack, and it already is out of whack with a 100 to 1 ratio. But then you need to ask yourself, are these attacks systemic or are they temporary? In the context of Bitcoin, it's systemic. Like if China were to perform the attack, it's kind of game over for Bitcoin. Like at least for the proof of work chain, there might need to be some sort of agreement where now BTC, the asset, goes live on another chain which is secure and can actually host these tokens. But the proof of work chain would be dead. Some people have talked about rebooting the chain with a different proof of work mechanism. This is also not going to work. You're kind of starting from scratch, and a sophisticated attacker like China would be able to perform the exact same attack with the new proof of work algorithm. So I really do believe that there is a big difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum in the context of 51% attacks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've largely taken the stance that it's live by the sword, die by the sword. And if Bitcoin gets bricked, okay, we tried and it goes to zero, and it is what it is. So thank you again, always, for coming on, answering questions. I throw some, kind of not curveballs, but I would just say maybe sometimes out of order stuff at people. So you're always gracious to come on. I think we'll have a discussion in 5 years, perhaps, and see if there's a quantum computer out there. But thanks again, Justin. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.